Thank you again for attending the Vrakas CPAs User Conference. This is Mary Ellen Michelson, CPA and shareholder with Vrakas CPA and Advisors. Mary Ellen has spent 22 years in the tax department and is an important part of the CAS department, which used to be called the Small Business Accounting Department. She's here today to present 1099s and what you need to know.
Thank you, Jordan. So what I typically do with this is I go through the form itself. There's a couple forms, give you a little information about what goes on them, who you mail them to, when they go out, answer any questions, give you a few examples, and then it's just, because this is important to have the information handy. We try to get this out to you so that when they are required to be filed and completed in January, you have them all done. Because right now is the time when you want to reach out to those vendors if you don't have the proper information so that you can get that information from them and have it available so that you can print from your software package and submit them right away in January. Or if you need to, then print the information and give it to your accounting firm or whoever, so that way you can get them timely filed. So here's the outline of everything, and the PDF of the whole presentation will be available. So some of the information returns that you may have seen in previous are the 1099 interest, the 1099-C, and the 1099-K. Along with the 1099 miscellaneous and NEC. These are some other 1099s that you may have seen or you may have to prepare. The 1099 interest is one that when typically you don't prepare it unless there's a loan and you've paid interest to a shareholder or a partner, then you may have to complete a 1099 interest. 1099-Ks, you will receive those if you do any transactions that are, and everybody's doing them nowadays, through third-party network sites. And this is typically the PayPal type of sites or your bank account, and you'll get a 1099-K showing all of the transactions reported to you. But we're going to focus on the 1099 miscellaneous and the 1099 NEC. And in general, they're both used, and just a little, there used to only be the 1099 miscellaneous, but the IRS has separated them out and put the 1099, created the 1099 NEC so that all the compensation for the employee, compensation goes on the 1099 NEC, and the other items like rent, legal proceeds, other things, and we'll go through those, are on the 1099 miscellaneous. So you're probably, because you have contractors, you're paying lawyer fees, you're paying accounting fees, you're paying landscapers, computer consulting, those all typically would go on a 1099 NEC, which is non-employee compensation. All of these, there are some general rules. It has to be in your trade or business. It has to be more than $600. And it's not for employees. There are some very small exceptions to the rule. And you want to make sure that you have the proper information as who they get issued to. So I've given a couple examples. The rents is on one. That's on the miscellaneous. You have prizes and awards, payments of medical and healthcare service payments. We'll get to that one. Are sometimes on a 1099 as well. This is also, both of these are also for cash or check transactions. If you pay it via debit card or a credit card transaction, you would not issue a 1099 miscellaneous or 1099 NEC for this, because that will already be included on your 1099-K. Because that's through that third-party transaction. As I mentioned, the IRS has over the years, every year they typically change the form slightly. The last 2 years, they've left it the same. one thing that they did change, for the 2023 filing period was that they made it a continuous form so that you do not need to get new forms every year. Sometimes you had to program your software every year. If you were able to print them out of your software, you'd buy a packet from the software provider and a packet of 50 of them. You might use 20 of them, and then you have to throw them away and buy a new packet. Last year, they were able to code the number that it says 20. And so then you just put in 23, 24, 25, 26. And so you can continuously use the form unless they change it in some other fashion. Now, we'll get into electronic filing. You won't need any paper documents for the IRS or the state, but for your recipients, you might, or you could file them electronically to the recipients, and we'll get through that later. This is just a small guide of some hot button boxes that you can see that it's $600 or more. They're a different box for different amounts, and they all have different things that would go in them based on what the IRS is looking for.
For attorney's fees,
Mm-hmm.
you had on that other slide, the miscellaneous was for that one.
That's 1099 miscellaneous is for attorney proceeds for, it's not for paying legal expenses,
Okay.
it's to pay proceeds
Okay.
for a settlement, not the actual, say it's $3,000 for setting up a partnership agreement, that would go on a 1099 NEC.
Okay.
And so that's why there's, you can see the NEC for attorney's fees, and then proceeds is the miscellaneous. As you can see that, you know, the calendar year, it says 20. That way you can use it continuously. It's the same form going forward. And all the various boxes, you want to make sure that you don't complete all the boxes. You only put in the necessary information. We're going to go through what goes in them, but we want to make sure that if you do complete something, say you have on the 1099 miscellaneous other income in box 3, you want to make sure that you're using a period for cents, or because if it's $1,000, you put one, make sure you have a 0.00, because otherwise the IRS might try to read it a different way. They're formatted to read 0.00. And so just kind of going through some of the boxes, as I mentioned, box 1 would be rents for the 1099 miscellaneous. This is for rental income for your, or expense, I should say, for not only an apartment building, but it could be if you're renting a piece of machinery to do some landscaping, that is considered rent. Rent is a service, and that's the way that they have described it, is that rent is considered a service, even though you're renting a physical location or a physical piece of product. It's actually a service that somebody's giving you, because you don't have the end item, you have to give it back. So you're renting a piece of machinery. Now, the invoice that you get may say $3,000 for that backhoe, and you might also have an operator at the same time that you are wherever you're renting the backhoes from, they're giving you that operator. If it's a $3,000 invoice and you need to issue the 1099, you would include that full $3,000. If they've separated out the cost for the operator and the cost for the backhoe, you could put the rent on box 1, but then you have the operator in the other boxes on the NEC. So you have different locations for different things. But again, if they only give you one invoice, which typically they would, you just put it in the rent box. Box 2 is royalties. This is just royalty payments. Typically, it's not for an intangibles. It is for intangibles like oil interests and things. So this is not something that I've typically seen. Other income is, I call it the box that gets the most questions, because if you can't find where to put something and you know you need to report it, typically it goes into box 3. It's the dump all. So it is other income. It could be prizes and awards. But again, this is not for services performed, because if somebody performed a service for you, you're paying them on a commission, that would not go here, because that would go into a non-employee compensation. This prizes and awards would be if you won something from a drawing, and it can't be a raffle. So there's a few different distinguishes there. One other thing is that sometimes you may have to complete a 1099 miscellaneous and use this box if you are paying for somebody's wages the year after that they've passed. So there are certain rules where you issue a W-2 and a 1099 miscellaneous in the same year when somebody has passed and you've paid them after the year end. So it wouldn't go on a W-2, it would go on the 1099 miscellaneous. So there are some specific rules that you have to follow with that. And it wouldn't get taxed for withholding and Social Security. But otherwise, typically, and the biggest thing on that box is that it's not subject to self-employment tax. So that's why distinction between that box and the 1099 NEC. The 1099 NEC is subject to self-employment tax. So that's why we say it is for services rendered, whereas box 3 is not. Box 4 is federal income tax withholding. So if you're required to do backup withholding, it's 24%. You have to withhold from any future payments for that vendor if they have not provided you an employer ID number, you've requested it. You may have gotten an IRS notice, a B notice, and then you're required to withhold on that vendor until they provide you the proper information. You would then have to withhold from their future payments, and then you'd fill in this box 4 with those payments that you withheld. Now, mind you, say you have to withhold 24%, and the future payments is only $500 for that vendor, you still withhold the 24%, but you're required now to issue a 1099. Now, my payment to that vendor is under $500 or under $600, the filing requirement, but because if I have any amount of payment for withholding, I am required to fill a 1099 miscellaneous. So I might have other compensation of 400, but then I have a withholding amount that's required. So any amount of the service would need to be reported. And then you report that withholding on an annual basis on a Form 945. Box 5 is the fishing boat proceeds. I have yet to have in my 25 years completed that box, so I don't know. Box 6, I have completed this one. Payments of medical and health payments. The one that I have seen for this is because people have paid for drug testing. And so you have an organization that you pay drug testing, and we'll get through that. There are some exceptions to the rules. A lot of times you don't issue a 1099 to a corporation. This is one of the exceptions. If you pay more than $600 to any organization for any type of drug testing, any medical and healthcare services, it includes product and services, you issue a 1099, and it includes in box 6. But as my notes say, it's not for your flexible spending account, it's not for your health insurance payments that you make or the HRAs. It's just for the actual drugs and medical services. And the one that I've seen is just for the drug testing. Box 7 is a checkbox. It is for direct sales of 5,000 or more. This example would be if you have a trade show, it's a temporary booth, and it's you're selling product on a buy, sell, or commission basis. Then you check this box. You also may have an amount in other income as well, either on the 1099 miscellaneous or on the NEC, and we'll get to that. But this box 7 is just a checkbox. Box 8, substitute payments in lieu of dividends or interest. I have not seen this one, nor box 9, crop insurance proceeds. Just because there are very few instances where you might see them. But box 10, gross proceeds paid to an attorney. I have seen this one due to the settlement paid to an attorney for a claimant. So you're paying the lawyer, and the lawyer is then going to issue the funds to the person that's supposed to receive them. You would then issue one to the attorney. A lot of times you don't, it's the insurance, and insurance organizations involved, and they pay the attorney those settlements, but sometimes you are required to. It just all depends on how the transaction's done. These other boxes here, also I have not, box 11, fish purchase for resale. Again, maybe if you're on the East Coast, West Coast, or Alaska, but I've never seen that one. Box 12, 409A deferrals. Box 13, FATCA filing requirement. This is if you have a foreign entity involved in the whole transaction. There might be some filing requirements, and this is a box that would need to be completed as well. Excess golden parachute payments. Can't say I've seen any of those in a long time either, but non-qualified deferred compensation I have seen as well. I have seen that one. But then the box 16 through 18 is state information. So you would have, for the state information, you're going to have the 2-digit state code, you would have a state ID number, and then you'd have the state dollar amount. You could have multiple states listed. So they do list where you can on 1099 have 2 states listed. If you need more, because the amount is used and paid to a variety of places, then you'd have to have another 1099 for the remainder. But for this case, you can see that there's the state code, and then the state ID, and then the state income. This, you break out the state information based on where the service was performed, not where you paid for the services. So you could have an address for your recipient be Wisconsin, but the services were performed in California. It just depends on where the services were performed. Sometimes, based on where your services were performed, you may only have one state here because not every state requires a 1099 to be mailed to them. So, but you'd still, for the recipient's preference, you'd want to split it out so that they know where the service was performed. The 1099 NEC, again, here's the, it's gonna just have the compensation, the federal income tax withholding, and the state information. Very small form. It's just for that non-employee compensation. But they did add last year the box for the payer made direct sales, only because you may have this checkbox and amount here, or you may have a checkbox on the 1099 miscellaneous and an amount there. So it depends on your situation and if it's subject to self-employment tax or not. And as I mentioned, this is subject to self-employment tax, trade or business again, more than $600. And one thing that I typically say is that, if you're unsure of which, if it's subject to self-employment tax or not, if it's typically a contractor, it's subject to self-employment tax, and I would put it on the 1099 NEC. Most commonly, as I mentioned, professional fees, commissions, attorney's fees, director's fees, board of directors fees go on a 1099 NEC. Independent contractors, salespeople. Here's where prizes and awards for those people that are not employees, but they performed a service, your top salesperson, that they would get a 1099, that would get added to their 1099 NEC. Things that are not non-employee compensation, cost of life insurance proceeds, anything to do with an employee typically, and I'm gonna say, most likely an employee would not get a 1099. All the wages, the travel, any reimbursements, bonuses, gifts, all of that should go on a W-2. They should not get a 1099 for anything. There are some instances where the employee is performing a service for you that is outside of their normal employee duties. Like you may have them also plow the parking lot because they do that on the side during the winter time to get more cash for not only you, but other businesses. They run it as a business. Then you may have to issue them a 1099 for that service, that plowing service. That would not go on their W-2 because they may be your secretary or they may be your receptionist or whatever. But they're running a side business. And so sometimes you have that. That's a very black and white situation. Sometimes it gets a little closer. I've had some questions over the years and they've been very gray, but you got to look at the situation. And so a lot of times people are trying to pay people as non-employee compensation versus an employee. And so there are things to consider that you have to look at and consider if they should be an employee or not. Over the years, I've been questioned as to, should I be treating them as an employee? Should I be treating them as a contractor or not? And each situation is different. You have to look at a few things. You have to look at control as to what they do, how they do it, when they do it, and with what materials. As well as you have to look at your industry, because sometimes in a certain industry, these people are always independent contractors, no matter what the situation. But a lot of times it's control. Who's got control of when they come in, how they do it, what they do, when they do it, and with what materials. And the IRS uses that as the guidance to determine if they're an employee or not. And the reason a lot of companies don't want to have people as employees is you don't have to pay as many expenses. The employee pays their share of the Social Security and Medicare. You don't have to pay it. You may not have to provide them health insurance or benefits if they're not employees. But the government would rather have you have employees than have you have independent contractors, because typically it's easier to get money from a business than it is from an individual. As I mentioned, it's again, control, the result. So one thing that they do look at is, if I'm an independent contractor, do I can hire anybody I want to do that job that you asked me to do. It's on me to get it done in a certain time frame. Obviously, we have an invoice, we have a rough idea of the timing, but doesn't mean that I have to do it, right? I can hire somebody else to do it. So it's my right to direct how it gets done, but the result is that, this remodel is done. Here's the remodel, but as a contractor, I could hire other people to do it. I don't need to. So just a few little, who's an independent contractor, who's an employee? As I mentioned, it's kind of control. Some of it is pretty black and white. Some people say, well, if I just get an invoice from the person, are they an independent contractor? No, not always. Do they do this for other people? I typically say, do they have the invoice on letterhead and do they do it for more than just you? Because if they're only doing it for you, the IRS may see that as they're an employee of yours, whether it's part-time or full-time. Doesn't mean you have to have obviously a full-time person. They could be part-time, still an employee of yours, if that's the only thing they do. But if they do multiple jobs and this is one thing they do, that might be something to help. But I always say, keep a record of it as well, and make sure you have an idea of what they do, how they do it, and when. If for some reason you have some employees or some independent contractors that should be treated as employees, there's a voluntary classification program that you can apply for. You pay a third of what the employment taxes were over the last 3 years, and you say, I'm now going to treat them as employees moving forward. There are some rules to it. We won't go into it, but it's just, it's out there if that is the case. Going back to the 1099 NEC, as I mentioned, there's direct sales where you can maybe have to use the NEC or the miscellaneous. The backup withholding is the same for the NEC as it is the miscellaneous, same rules. You could be paying your independent contractor $500, but because you've had to withhold, you're required to issue a 1099. Same state information box is required, just obviously a different box number. Being that you could have multiple states, because you could have somebody working in multiple states. There is an account number that is on the miscellaneous and NEC. This account number is not a required account number for most people. It's for you to identify which 1099, because you may have a vendor that you've issued multiple 1099s to. And so this is just a way for your identification if you get an IRS notice. One requirement that is not necessarily listed because there's no box is that you need a phone number for the person that is issuing the 1099. You have to have your phone number listed. It just says address, but a phone number needs to be listed. It's required, but it's, they should have a box for it, but there's not. As I mentioned, the FATCA filing is only for the 1099 miscellaneous, but it is regarding foreign entities and foreign financial institutions. So I typically haven't seen this a couple times, but not many. The second TIN notice, this is because sometimes you have issues with the IRS and you get notices back from them. The ID number that you issued the 1099 in doesn't match the IRS's website, or IRS's computer system. So it's a digit off or something. But you look at the notice that they sent you, you look at your W-9 that the vendor issued you, and they're the same. You go, but I've issued it this way. You ask the vendor, they've given you it, and the next year, you complete the 1099s, you send it off to the IRS with that number, the IRS sends you another notice back. Well, if they do it a couple years in a row, but the vendor has given you the W-9, you have no reason to believe that it's incorrect. There is a way you can check, and we'll get to that, but you can mark this box for that vendor that recipient, and the IRS won't send you another notice for that one 1099. Don't ask me why they do that, but you can't do it for all of them. So, but if you've received multiple and you have tried to match it, you know, you keep sending a W-9, they keep sending you one back and it has the same numbers, you keep sending it to the IRS, and for some reason, sometimes there's a glitch. I haven't seen this often. Because typically it's one reason the person that filled out the W-9 didn't put the proper name or a number was transposed, but that you could potentially have an issue. One thing, so we mentioned that you issue 1099s for $600 or more in a trade or business, but who gets them? Who receives a 1099? Well, every organization should get them, except for typically you don't issue to a corporation, but there are some exceptions. Then you don't issue them to government entities and you do not issue them to charitable organizations. Now, charitable organizations still need to issue 1099s to their vendors. Corporations still need to issue 1099s to their vendors. But if I'm a partnership and I am completing a 1099 for computer consulting, and that computer consulting organization is a corporation, an S corporation or a C corporation, I would not need to issue them a 1099. But if I am issuing them a 1099 for medical and healthcare payments, attorneys, all attorneys receive 1099s. You always issue a 1099 to an attorney if you've paid them more than $600. Doesn't matter if they're a corporation, if they're S corporation or C corporation, they all get them. Yeah, it's always been that way, and
it used to be for accounting firms also. For what? Accounting firms.
well, accounting firms would get one if they're partnerships, but if they're corporations, like we're a corporation, we wouldn't get issued a 1099. But if we were a partnership, you would issue us a 1099.
But it used to be that no matter what an accounting firm was.
Well, that was more
That
than
was
25 years ago.
Yeah.
Because I was gonna say, I've been doing this for, well, I should say more than 15, because I've been doing this for more than 15 years, and I haven't seen that. But yeah, that some people say, oh, well, I need your W-9. And I go, sure, you can have it, but you're not gonna send us one because it says Vrakas and CPAs and advisors, and we used to have SC after our name, so Service Corporation. But and here's where I mentioned, you know, they have medical and healthcare payments, so. Now, a lot of times, you have to try to figure out, again, who gets them, sole proprietors and individuals. If I'm in my trader business and I'm an accounting firm or an law firm, and have somebody come in and they do cleaning for me, and they are just doing it as a sole proprietor, I would issue them a 1099 if I paid them more than $600. And you need to make sure that however they file their tax return is how that 1099 needs to be issued. So it could have the individual's name, and we have an example here, individual's name, doing business as. This is the proper way to do it. And you would need a social security number if I'm a sole proprietor or I'm an individual doing business. And this example is Smith Landscaping, because the IRS is going to match the social security number to my tax return. Wisconsin is going to match the social security number to my tax return. That's where my income, my $5,500 is going to be reported as on my individual income tax return, not on a partnership, not on a corporation return. Now, a lot of times you might see, and I think we have an LLCs. They could be filed as partnerships. They could be filed as sole proprietors. We have to actually get that information and determine or they could be filed as a corporation, how they're going to be reported. So here again, I'm an LLC, but I'm a single member LLC, and we'll get to know how you know this, but I need to be listed as James Jones? Okay, James Jones, and I have my social security number. Because the IRS in the state of Wisconsin, or the state that I'm working with, is going to identify that on my individual income tax return. I'm a single member. It's a Schedule C for my business. Yes, I may have employees and I may have a federal identification number that would work for federal. It will not work for Wisconsin. Wisconsin does not have that on file anywhere. They only have your social security number. So a lot of times those typically could get rejected. I have not seen many of them get rejected from Wisconsin, but on occasion they have. But if I have a LLC filing as a partnership, again, same amount, 5,500, but instead I have a federal identification number and a business name. Gets a little tricky when it's an LLC because you have to figure out what they file as. And we'll show you the W-9, and that's how you know what they file as. Here is an example of a corporation that gets a 1099. Of course, we used a law firm as our example because they all get 1099s no matter what. And there are sometimes where you have to think about how you want to issue these 1099s, and it could be based on the situation. There are specific rules. If you bought a company, if you sold a company, you may have to figure out who's going to issue the 1099s. If you have to issue yours and then the new company is going to issue them. So there's specific rules regarding that. I just want to put it out there so that everybody is aware of that. The nominee middleman return, I have only seen this once, and that is just because it's more of an investment where I get a 1099, but then I have to issue it out to other people because they're the ones that also receive the income. It's like an investment group. But otherwise, I typically haven't seen that in too many situations, but it is out there. So we have to actually get the information to be able to complete the 1099s. We have to request the recipient's taxpayer identification number, their address, their information. How we do that is with a W-9. And you want to make sure that it is getting completed correctly, because if not, this is where your IRS notices typically come from, is because they have marked, maybe they've put their individual name or their business name on line 1, right? And they've given you an employer ID number, but they marked that they are an LLC. And if they mark that they're an LLC and they didn't put that they're a C or an S or a partnership, then the issue becomes that you really truly need their social security number and their name and not the business name, because it's not going to tie out. They should have marked individual sole proprietor, single member LLC, but instead they marked this one and left this blank. I always, whenever I get W-9s and somebody's marked LLC, if they haven't put anything here, I send it back to them and I say, please complete. If I see a business name and a social security number, I say, please complete, because you cannot have a business name and a social security number that's going to get kicked out immediately. They're just not going to recognize it. You can go to the IRS. There is, I'm going to skip over. There is this program where you can match your W-9s with the IRS system. And so you log in. This is slightly changed because now we have this IRS ID me stuff and everything, but there is a program at the IRS website where it's a TIN matching, and you put that in the search it will take you directly there. If you go to irs.gov and put tin matching in the search, and it will tell you, and what you do is you put that information that they gave you from the W-9, the ID number and the name, and it will tell you if it matches the IRS's website. It won't give you the name or the number, but it will tell you if it matches. Then if it doesn't match, you can go right back to that vendor and say, hey, this doesn't match the IRS website. Here's my proof. You need to provide the proper information. That avoids any additional notices you get. 1099 NECs and miscellaneouses, obviously we all know they're due early in the year. The NECs and the miscellaneouses are both due to the recipients, now this is the vendors, by January 31st, but the NEC is due to the IRS by January 31st as well. Your miscellaneouses aren't due to the IRS until February 28th. But I say get them all done at the same time, then you don't have to worry about them, because otherwise you might miss the deadline. This is the reason that the IRS changed and now has two forms, because they wanted two different deadlines. Now, for the state of Wisconsin, they're all due by January 31st. There are some exceptions, and for 2020, because the due date is 2025 now, January 31st is in the middle of the week. Otherwise, if it fell on a weekend, it would be February 1st, February 2nd, whatever date is, because it's never due on a Saturday or Sunday or a holiday. It's always due on a weekday. So if it falls on a weekend, you have until the next business day. There are a few exceptions. If you have these 1099B, the 1099S, or the 1099 miscellaneous, box 8 or box 10 isn't due until February 17th, 2025. Again, the Wisconsin is due January 31st. If you're filing for another states, not every state has a requirement of a filing. We do have some Illinois clients, and Illinois does not require you to send them a 1099. There are some extensions, but be wary. The IRS now has some forms, but then if you want to extend for the recipients, because you've had computer issues or something, it's a fax only. And I don't know how many people have a fax machine to be able to fax it to the IRS. So I know we still do, but I think they're very few and far between. And as I mentioned, if the due date falls on a weekend or a legal holiday, it's the next business day. Now, this is a little bit of information, how to file them. The IRS changed the rules last year. If you have 10 or more 1099s, they all have to be electronically submitted. Now, it used to be 250, and it used to be 250 of any one kind. Now, this 10 includes W-2s, 1099s, 941s. So if you have any of these items, if you have 7 employees and you're going to issue 4 1099s, you have to electronically file your 4 1099s to the IRS, because you have now hit over 10. Wisconsin was, if you had more than 9, because if you had 9 or less for the state of Wisconsin, you could paper file them. But if you had 10, you had to electronically submit them to the state of Wisconsin. Again, each state has a different rule, so you have to follow those. There are some free file systems with the IRS. The Information Reporting Intake System, IRIS, is a free file. But again, this is for the IRS only. Then you have to go around to the state of Wisconsin, and you may have to retype them, because this is a type-in online portal. The fire system you can upload, but it's uploading a certain program format that you have to actually upload to the IRS. There are some other software programs out there, tax1099.com. There's a few other ones out there that are very good. They save your software as well. You put the information, sometimes you can export from your software package into an Excel and upload to these other, programs to get them so that it's easier to electronically submit them. For the recipients, typically you issue them in a paper copy. You can now issue them via email to them electronically, but you have to test this theory out. There is a, format that you have to file in, and you have to make sure you're doing it correctly. You do need to, make sure you get a response. So you send them an email and you get a response back before you can say that that email address is a legit email address. So you kind of have to test the theory. I went through the Wisconsin's filing. If you were, this is just in here because we used to have a lot more paper filing than we do electronic filing. So there are some specific documentation and addresses as to where to paper file if you need to. The one thing that I did want to mention is that if you're electronically submitting everything, which is really easy these days, through, like I said, the tax1099.com, I don't remember the name of the software we use, Accounting CS, is the software we use. Sometimes QuickBooks, Sage, all those, you just upload the programs. You have to watch which states you are in to which software packages will upload them. But you won't need a transmittal copy. This is just the paper copy of the transmittal. But when you electronically submit them, make sure that you get that confirmation back from the IRS. If you have any issues, sometimes there's duplications. I've seen this happen where you've sent them twice and you have two confirmations. You need to call them and make sure that you get this squared away, because otherwise the recipients are gonna, if the IRS sees two 1099s, they're not gonna match if they were the exact same numbers. They're gonna expect that recipient that you sent the 1099 to report it twice. So that could cause issues. So if you notice that there are some corrections that you need to do. The one thing I did want to mention is when you're doing 1099s, NECs or miscellaneouses, and you make a mistake and you're going to correct one, things happen. There is a box at the top of the form that must be marked so that the IRS will read that. If you mark it the corrected, the IRS will read that 1099 as the new corrected 1099. You don't send them the other one as well and mark it void. You just don't send them the first one. You only send them the new corrected one. Now, the void box at the top this is when it was a paper file and you had 3 of them on a piece of paper. What would happen is you had the first one completed, the second one, oh, it was a mistake. So you marked void on it and you completed the third one. It's machine read. So then it's machine read. And so then what happens is the first one will come up and be read. The second one, because it was marked void, will skip. The IRS will skip it and they'll read the third one. So that's what the word void means, is the IRS will not read that 1099. So there are penalties for all the filings and failures to file. They change every year. They keep going up a little bit here and there. Sometimes you do have things that occur and you don't get them issued on time. There is a one-time oops. You just need to make sure that you have followed the IRS guidance and said, all right, I completed them. I've sent them as soon as I could. We had changeover in our staff and they didn't get issued. Sometimes they'll forgive you. Otherwise, there are penalties, and it's based on when you actually did send them. A lot of it is based on some format issues and things. Here again, if nothing is required in the box, don't put anything in it. Some of this is based on paper filing. Don't change the format of the field names, they're pre-printed in there for a reason, recipient or vendors. Again, some more penalties. Wisconsin has instituted a $10 violation for failure to file them electronically. I have seen this come out in a warning, but I haven't seen anybody failure to receive it yet. Just some common errors, duplicate filing, as I mentioned. And one thing to make note of is, well, how long should you keep them? You should keep them for at least 4 years, because then you have the information if it ever comes under audit. Payroll items should always be kept for 6 years. And then also one thing I want to make note, again, this is paper filing. When you're sending them to the recipient, it used to be that you'd always have an envelope and it'd be marked official tax document. Now we try not to do that. Because if I'm looking at your mail, what is the first thing I'm gonna take? That official tax document. Even though it's a federal offense, but they're not worried about that. But you could, even if you have official tax document, you could have the first 5 digits marked out of their social security number or their business number and only have the last 4. But that's only to the recipient. To the IRS, you need to show all 9 numbers. And if you're sending them electronically, I would suggest encrypting that file to them and then providing them a password some other way. Any questions? I know I went through a lot, and I know there was a few during it. If not, thank you.
I guess I got one question.
Sure.
So we're set up as an S corp and we receive a ton of 1099s, which we shouldn't be.
Mhm.
And I've spoken with these people about it.
Have you given them a completed W-9
Yes.
with the S Corp?
Yes. And what do you do?
You just file them away. You don't need to do anything with them. Yeah, they're just completing them, because I've always said, and they've probably listened to me, when in doubt, complete them. Because if you don't know, I'm gonna send you a 1099. I'd rather send too many 1099s because I'm not gonna get a penalty for that than not sending enough. So I always say, when in doubt, complete one. So if I get a W-9 and I'm not sure because nobody's giving me the proper completed information, I'm gonna send them a 1099.
What I do too at the beginning of the year, like the first couple months, to my vendors that I'm paying, I'll put a little slip in there. When I send them a check, to say, please send me your updated W-9 information. Just so I'm
Yeah.
trying to find stuff towards the end of the year.
That's perfect. Some people go through their files and every 2 years do that. If sometimes when you get a new vendor, your automatic procedure is, here's a W-9, yeah. It's just setting up a procedure to get it so that, so you're not scrambling in January.